14.10 will feature a massive item overhaul as the ADC role will be front and center. However, every single role will be receiving changes in some way, shape, or form. Runes are being adjusted, summoner spells are receiving changes. There's just so much going on this patch, and we're here to break it all down. So in today's video, we'll be providing you guys with a tier list for every single role in patch 14.10. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay up to date and so you don't miss out on next week's changes. And remember, if you're struggling to climb in League, SkillCapped is the only place that guarantees you'll climb at least 5 divisions while actively using our service. Otherwise, you can claim a full refund. We do this because our service really works, and this is the best time of the season to get in on SkillCapped, as we've just released tons of site-exclusive courses designed for you to power learn the most important concepts for climbing in League of Legends stupidly fast, compared to those who don't use SkillCapped. Join today for unlimited access to the world's most famously effective League of Legends guides, and remember, one subscription gives you access to all of our other games as well. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description below to stop wasting time being hard stuck and get the rank you actually want. And with that said, let's get into it. Let's start off the video by covering all the key item changes that you should be aware of. For ADC, every crit item will now have 25% crit, and the crit on Zeal will be increased as well, going from 15 to 20%. Dagger will be receiving a small nerf, with its attack speed being lowered from 12 to 10%. Kerchai's Shard, which was a component item that built into Fire Cannon, Stormrazor, Static Shiv, and Voltaic Cyclosword, is being removed from the game. Stormrazor is also going to be completely removed from the game in 14.10. Replacing Kerchai's Shard is a new epic item called Scout Slingshot. For 900 gold, you'll be getting 20% attack speed and a passive that deals magic damage on hit. Noon Quiver will receive a pretty big overhaul, as it will now provide 20% crit. However, the AD is down and the attack speed is being removed. Hearthbound Axe will have a bunch of its stats moved around as cost of the item is going up, AD is being increased by 5, while attack speed is down by 5%. The removal of Stormrazor combined with these buffs to Infinity Edge should lead to a big shift in what certain ADC build paths look like. IE is going to provide a massive spike now, as the cost is only going up by 100 gold. However, you'll be getting 5% more crit and 15 more AD. The 15 AD alone has a gold value of 525, so with the item only going up by 100 gold, this is a huge gold efficiency buff to IE. There will probably end up being a bunch of ADCs who rush Infinity Edge, but since the Collector is being buffed as well, we could see a lot of champs rush the Collector instead and then go into IE second. Jhin and Samira are two champs who should really be liking 14.10 with this core build. The Collector will now have 25% crit, 5 more AD, lethality is dropping by 1, while the cost is going up by 100 gold. Bloodthirster as a rush item may be back on the menu for a few champs in 14.10, as Riot's reverting its passive to how it was a few seasons ago, giving it a lot more flat AD but removing the crit. With the shield back on BT and the item giving you 80 AD now, Draven should really be liking this one. Misfortune was another ADC who liked rushing Bloodthirster when it had the shield, so she's one to keep an eye on as well. Essence Reaver will be losing its Spellblade passive in 14.10, and that should heavily influence the strength of Ezreal, Smolder, and Gangplank. Ez and Smolder are likely two ADCs that you'll want to be staying away from to start off the patch, unless there ends up being a new OP build that pops up for them. Gangplank builds will be very interesting to track because the champ doesn't really want to build Trinity Force, and losing the Spellblade proc from ER will hurt him a ton. Kraken Slayer will no longer provide any crit, so it will be interesting to see how this impacts the priority of the item. Someone like Viego, who actually has crit scaling in his kit, likely walks away from this change worse off. ADCs who are rushing Kraken the most, like Jinx, Aphelios, and Tristana, will probably be fine going for the IE rush now. It's tough to say for Xayah though, as straight up rushing IE seems like it would be a bit odd for her. As for Yasuo and Yone, they definitely will be dropping Kraken now, as crit is such an important stat for them. Overall, a lot of champion builds will be on the move for 14.10 due to Kraken losing its crit chance. It's not just Kraken Slayer that will be losing its crit, as Static Shiv follows suit. To compensate, attack speed on Shiv is up from 30 to 40%, and it's going to have a brand new passive to where you only gain the chain lightning effect when you kill a minion or an enemy. Shiv's build path will also be quite unique, as Scout Slingshot and Hearthbound Axe are components. Quick Blades is getting a complete rework for next patch, as Riot's rebranding it to Navori Flicker Blades. AD on the item is gone, and so is the ability haste, as Flicker Blades will be an attack speed item with movement speed as well. You'll still have the same passive though, so this likely remains a solid second purchase on the likes of Xayah and Sivir at least. As for champs like Lucian or Smolder though, who would rather have AD than attack speed, they probably end up dropping the item. This is another reason to why Smolder likely struggles in 14.10, as Essence Reaver and Navori are both fundamentally different now and not in a way that benefits him. him. Legendary items that build out of Zeal are all being changed for next patch so that they no longer provide any AD. So even though the AD is going up on Infinity Edge, if you want an attack speed item for your second purchase, you will have less AD overall than in 14.9 on 2 completed items. Fire Cannon, for example, had 30 AD in 14.9, but now it's gone for 14.10. AD on Infinity Edge is up by 15, so in total, you'll be losing 15 AD in the mid-game. To compensate though, the cost on all of these crit attack speed items are going down and will all be priced at 2600 gold. Attack speed is heavily buffed on Fire Cannon, going from 20 to 35%, and crit is up as well. Overall, with the direction of these changes, it looks like Riot wants to promote more extended fight strength for ADCs instead of upfront damage. Phantom Dancer will be losing its AD, however, attack speed is up from 30 to 60%, and crit is up as well from 20 to 25%. So it looks like PD is back to being that big ticket attack speed item, and we could definitely see a 2-item core of Infinity Edge and Phantom Dancer make a comeback on a bunch of champs for 14.10. Hurricane never had any AD, but it did offer on-hit damage, so Riot is removing that for this patch. They're increasing the Bolt total AD scaling from 40 to 55% though, and increasing crit from 20 to 25%. Yuntal Wild Arrows is a brand new ADC item being added, and it's going to provide a mass amount of AD. 65 AD and 25 crit are the stats, while its passive will cause crits to deal 35% additional physical damage over 2 seconds. Items like Wild Arrows could have potential on Draven, Lucian, Jhin, Samira, Misfortune, and Neela. Basically champs that would rather have more raw AD than attack speed. The passive could end up being pretty nasty if you got to 100% crit, as you'd be able to proc that additional damage on every auto attack. It's all going to come down to how powerful the passive actually ends up being. Lord Doms is being changed so that the armor pen, crit, and AD are all increased. However, the Giant Slayer passive is being removed. The Giant Slayer passive dealt bonus damage based on the target's max health, so with that gone and with Lord Doms offering more raw value from its stats, there could be a world where the item is a good second purchase in games where enemies are stacking a ton of armor. Just a small buff to Mortal Reminder for 14.10 with its crit being increased from 20 to 25%. 2 of the more defensive ADC items are being adjusted, with Mercurial Scimitar losing its crit but gaining 10% lifesteal. Shield Bow will be going in the opposite direction, as it's actually losing its lifesteal and instead will have more AD and crit. Blade of the Ruined King will be losing some of its percent health on hit damage, but in exchange will receive more stats, as AD, attack speed, and lifesteal are all going up. The passive is getting a pretty big change, as well as the slow will now trigger on the third attack instead of the first. So with the percent health damage lowered, items should be a bit weaker in the later stages of the game. However, since AD is up by 15, early game strength may now be stronger. Just a small shift of stats on Terminus for 14.10, as Riot will be lowering its AD from 40 to 35 while increasing the attack speed from 30 to 35%. We've got some Black Cleaver buffs on the way, with the shred per stack going up from 5 to 6%. Really nice indirect buff to Urgot here, as he's a champ who has been rushing Cleaver and can stack up his passive extremely fast. Of course, there's a bunch of other champs who like to build Cleaver second who will benefit as well, but Urgot will be the biggest winner due to being able to take advantage of the buff earlier in the game. A new fighter item will be hitting the Rift this patch, and it's called Overlord's Bloodmail. Health and AD are the stats, while the passive will convert 2% of your bonus health into AD. If you guys remember, this was the passive that used to be on Titanic Hydra that is now being placed on Overlords. The second passive will provide you with up to 10% increased AD based on your missing health. Seems like a pretty decent item for Olaf, as someone who thrives more on lower health. Changes to tank items are on the way, and first up, there's one item that will be removed from the game, and it's Anathema's Chains. Sunfire will have some of its power shifted around, as Riot will be lowering the health on the item but giving it 10 ability haste. Same thing goes for Hollow Radiance. Health is being lowered, but 10 ability haste is being tacked on. Warmogs may actually be a viable pickup moving forward, as the health on the item is going up from 750 to 1000. Base health regen is going down from 200 to 100% to compensate. Remember as well that Blade of the Ruined King is losing percent health damage for next patch, so in a way, stacking health will be a little more reliable. Riot's changing Winter's approach so that it provides 150 more health, but the health from mana scaling is adjusted from 8% total mana to 15% bonus mana. Randuin's is getting a lot more armor for next patch, going from 55 to 75. Active slow is up from 55 to 70%, but every other change is a nerf. Active cooldown is up, health is being lowered, and you'll no longer have the rock solid passive. Just a simple change being issued to Unending Despair, as the cooldown on its passive is being lowered from 7 to 5 seconds. Zeke's and Knight's Vow are both being changed for 14.10, so let's have a look at what's happening. Zeke's is now going to be more of a jack of all trades pickup for tank supports, with magic resist being added to the item and health going up. Knight's Vow, on the other hand, is being changed so that its armor armor is down. It will now have base health regen, damage reduction is being increased, and its passive will no longer double the redirect damage if the linked ally is below 30% health. There's a bunch of changes to Abyssal Mask, with the key one being that its magic resist shred is changed from a flat amount to now just giving you 20% shred. There's a new Mage epic item being introduced, and it's called Faded Ashes. It will cost 900 gold, give 40 AP, and a passive that deals burn damage. The item will be a component to Liandry's Torment, replacing the Blasting Wand, and also a component to the brand new legendary item called Blackfire Torch. Blackfire Torch will be the mana equivalent of Liandry's. It's going to provide 25 haste, 90 AP, 600 mana, and a burn passive. It will be interesting to see if Blackfire and Liandry's end up being purchased together, because as far as we know, the burn passives on both items are not unique. Brand, Malzahar, Zyra, Lilia, Aurelion Sol, Teemo, Heimerdinger, Azir, Talia, and Cassio are a bunch of champs that will have to experiment running Blackfire Torch on. Honestly, all mages who run off mana could have potential with the item though, but those champs we noted are most likely to succeed with it. Ludens will receive a couple pretty big changes for 14.10 with its passive damage going up. However, the cooldown will now just be every 12 seconds instead of running off the charge system where you'd gain one charge every 3 seconds. A small buff to Verdant Barrier is on the way, with its cost being lowered from 1700 to 1600 gold. In the video last week where we covered all the item changes, it looked like Banshees was being changed so that it would provide movement speed when the shield was broken, but it seems as if that has now been scrapped from the patch. There are a few Enchanter items being adjusted, and first up is Dawn Core. If you haven't been following League very closely this season, you probably don't even know what this item does, and we can't blame you, as it's one of the least purchased items in the game. There's just a bunch of stats being shifted around on the item, and because of that, it's hard to say whether these end up being net positive or negative. There was one point last season where every Enchanter was running Echoes of Helia, but then it got nerfed and hasn't been prioritized ever since. Max shards are being lowered while damage per shard is going up, so it looks like some overall buffs to the item in 14.10. Shurelius has found its way onto a bunch of mid lane champs like TF, Galio, and Veigar as of recent, so Riot's looking to reduce its strength. Movement speed is dropping while the AP is being reduced too. There are a bunch of changes to boots for next patch, and the big one revolves around the removal of mobility boots. Taking mobility boots' place will be a new pair of sneakers called Symbiotic Souls. 35 movement speed and an empowered recall is what the boots will provide. There will be a passive on the item to where when you travel 150,000 units of distance, the boots become upgraded to Synchronized Souls. Synchronized Souls will give you 45 movement speed, the empowered recall, and 45 out of combat movement speed. So basically, instead of getting the out of combat movement speed immediately when you pick up Moby boots, there will now be a delay. Looks like an overall downgrade from mobility boots, and supports that want a ton of movement speed early in the game will likely just go with swiftness boots now. Steel caps are being adjusted so that the cost is lower, armor is up, but the percent damage that you reduce from autos is down from 12 to 8%. So these should land as net negative changes. Should be a nice indirect buff to top lane champs who are auto-reliant, as rushing steel caps has always been a good way to shut them down. ADCs will no longer have to sit on boots when they are fully maxed out on their builds anymore, as Berserker's Greaves will be upgradable into a new item called Zephyr. You will need to be level 15 in order to purchase Zephyr, and it will provide attack speed, base movement speed, along with on-hit movement speed. And for the final item change, Corrupting Potion will no longer exist as it's being removed for 14.10. The massive change to runes for next patch revolves around Lethal Tempo being completely removed from the game. PTA is being adjusted so that it's more of a selfish rune. Now when you proc the rune, instead of gaining the damage amp on that one target, you'll now gain a damage amp on all targets. Albeit it's now only you who gains this damage amp and no longer your teammates. So as an isolated rune, PTA is getting better for next patch, but say for example you're in a 2v2 and all you can do is proc PTA and then retreat because you're too low to continue fighting. You'll have less damage overall since your support won't be doing any additional damage. Someone like Trundle should be just fine in 14.10 even with Lethal Tempo's removal, as he can swap to PTA and get a lot of value out of the rune when he's splitting and ends up in a 1v1 scenario. It's tough to say whether the changes are net positive or negative for ADCs though, as you're more often than not going to be taking fights with a teammate, so losing the team damage amp will hurt you in a lot of instances. Fleet is being adjusted in 14.10 so that its healing is slightly lower, but movement speed duration is up from 1 to 1.25 seconds. So not as big as a power shift as we saw to press the attack, and any champs that were running Fleet in recent patches should continue to prioritize it. A couple of runes in the precision tree will be removed, as Overheal and Legend Tenacity are both gone from the game moving forward. Taking Overheal's place is a new rune called Absorb Life, and this one will provide you with 2 scaling to 17 healing when you kill a target. Legend Haste will be the rune replacing Legend Tenacity, tenacity, and it will provide 1.5 ability haste for every legend stack, maxing out at 15 haste. Cut Down Rune is being altered so that instead of dealing bonus damage when the enemy has a health advantage, it will now deal bonus damage when enemies are above 60% health. There's one keystone rune that will be removed from the domination tree this patch, and it's Predator. Hail of Blades is being nerfed for ranged champions with its attack speed lowered from 110 to 80%. Sudden Impact will now have a 10-second cooldown. However, instead of granting you pen for 4 seconds after exiting mobility or stealth, you'll gain true damage. Another rune being removed for next patch is Ingenious Hunter, and it doesn't look like anything will be taking its place. Relentless Hunter will be receiving a nerf as its starting out of combat movement speed is dropping from 5 to 0. First Strike is going to provide you with more gold income in the early game, with the base gold on proc going from 5 to 15. Gold from bonus damage is being lowered, however, for both melee and ranged champions. Damage amp is being increased from 7 to 8%. The Futures Market rune is being removed for this patch, but there will be a new rune added that will fit a similar theme. This new rune is called Cash Back, and it will give you 6% gold back when you purchase each legendary item. Time Warp Tonic is being changed so that its effect no longer works on biscuits or with mana, and no longer grants 2% movement speed while potions are active. In exchange, however, you will now be able to restore 40% of the potion's heal immediately, in addition to the 100% healing over time. So if we are interpreting this correctly, you'll in a way be getting 40% more value out of your potions. This could make the rune a really great option now on champs that want a hard win lane. Minion Dematerializer is being removed for the next patch, and there will be a new rune added called Jack of All Trades. Jack of All Trades is going to be a rune that you purchase on champions whose builds are more hybrid focused. For each different stat that you gain from items, you'll gain one Jack stat, and each stat grants 1 ability haste. You'll then gain 10 to 25 bonus adaptive damage when you reach 5 or 10 Jack stats, respectively. The final rune change is to Font of Life, as impairing movement will no longer apply an on-hit heal for allies, and instead grant you and your lowest health ally a heal when you impair movement. On top of all the item and rune changes, there are a bunch of summoner spells that will be adjusted in 14.10. Barrier will be buffed with its shielding and shield duration both going up. Cleanse is being changed so that its lingering tenacity is up from 65 to 75%. However, the cooldown of the summoner spell is going from 210 to 240 seconds. Exhaust will have its slow increased from 30 to 40%, but like Cleanse, its cooldown is going from 210 to 240 seconds. Big nerfs to Ghost are on the way for 14.10, with the duration being reduced from 15 to 10 seconds, while the cooldown is up from 210 to 240 seconds. Heal will receive a buff with its ally heal range being increased from 835 to 900. So, with all the item, rune, and summoner changes covered, let's move on to the role-specific changes, starting with top lane. Tryndamere will be receiving a buff for this patch, with his crit chance at 100 Fury going from 40 to 50%. There are so many changes that will affect Tryndamere's strength for 14.10, so we're not going to be adjusting him anywhere in the tier list for now, as he'll remain in A. Riot's going very light on the direct champion changes in 14.10 due to all the system changes, so let's jump right into the top lane tier list. We're not going to be making any major adjustments to the pre-patch tier list for top lane, however, there are a few things to discuss. We'll be moving Urgot back up into the OP tier, as he'll be gaining a good amount of strength due to the Black Cleaver buffs. Darius is dropping out of the OP tier, as he's going to be negatively impacted by the nerfs to Ghost more than a lot of other champs. As for Trundle, we're moving him out of OP for the time being as well. Lethal Tempo was just so strong on the champ, and even though he can swap over to PTA and likely remain a very solid pick, we don't see him holding on to OP status. Gangplank is one top lane champ we'll be paying close attention to, and we'll adjust his tier list placement if need be for the mid-patch tier list. Initial expectations are that GP is likely weaker for this patch due to the Essence Reaver no longer providing the Spellblade passive. However, there could end up being a new build that pops up and completely alleviates that notion. Aurelia is one to watch this patch as well, as changes to Blade of the Ruined King will affect Aurelia most significantly, as she almost always rushes the item. It's tough to say if the added stats will outweigh the percent health damage nerf, as Aurelia is not a champ who has super high AD ratios. 15 extra AD to Blade of the Ruined King would feel a lot better if Aurelia's R and E had AD ratios instead of AP ratios. And before we head into the jungle, let's boost your win rate with SkillCapped's tip of the week. A cheater recall is a really famous early wave strategy and one of the deadliest tactics you can pull off for a big lead if done properly. Here's how it works. On the first wave, get the minion advantage by damaging the wave more than the enemy. As the second wave arrives, look to maintain your minion advantage as much as possible. Don't make the mistake of over pushing though, as you don't want to crash just yet. That's because you want to crash precisely on the third wave. So once it arrives, push as quickly as possible to crash it into the tower. Now you can take a free recall while your opponent is distracted with the wave. Now you'll have an item advantage with full health and mana on top of that, so walk back to lane. The wave will have rebounded back into you, so you can now freeze and force trades with your item advantage and play the lane normally from there. You can use a cheater recall in all 3 lanes to get a guaranteed advantage right at the start of the game. If you want to learn more game-changing wave control tips like these, then take our new Season 14 wave control course at SkillCapped. You can check it out with the link in the description below. Riot's back at it again, handing out bonus damage to monsters to champions that don't normally jungle. Cho'Gath is first in line as his E monster damage cap is being increased. Cho jungle had a very low play rate in 14.9 and was not performing well at all, so even with this change, we won't be adding him to the tier list, but if the buff does end up more impactful than expected, we'll circle back for the mid-patch tier list. Set is the second jungler who will receive bonus monster damage, as his E will now be dealing 100 bonus damage to monsters. Now, unlike Cho'Gath, Set was actually a champ played in the jungle a little bit over the past few seasons. He hasn't been in meta for quite some time, but there was one point where he was even being played in pro. There's definitely some potential here, as 100 bonus damage on an AoE spell will significantly boost Set's clear. Like Cho'Gath though, due to his very low play rate in 14.9, we're not going to jump the gun and place Set anywhere on the jungle tier list just yet, as it's too difficult to accurately predict where he will land power-wise as a result of this buff. More follow-up changes to Skarner are on the way, with Riot reducing his Q third hit monster damage cap. Q damage bonus health scaling is also being lowered from 5 to 4%. Q turret damage is going up, and Q mana cost is going down, so this more heavily impacts top lane Skarner. E total health scaling damage is dropping from 10 to 8%, while R cast time is being reduced from 0.75 to 0.65 seconds. All in all, these are definitely net nerfs to Skarner jungle, and we'll be moving him out of S tier and into A for 14.10. There are a bunch of item changes that will influence the jungle meta in 14.10, so let's have a look at what the tier list is looking like. We're moving Viego out of the OP tier, as we expect for the Kraken Slayer changes to negatively impact him. Losing crit on Kraken hurts Viego more than a lot of other champs, since his Q damage literally scales off crit. Of course, there could be a brand new build that pops up and makes Viego even more OP, but if that's the case, we'll be sure to report back with that for the mid-patch tier list update. Rek'Sai is being moved up into the OP tier for jungle in 14.10, as she's already been a top performer in recent patches and will only be getting better due to the Black Cleaver buffs. Watch out for Lilia, Talia, Karthus, and Brand with the new Mage item Blackfire Torch. Its burn damage is actually amplified against monsters, so it's almost as if the item was built for AP junglers. Graves and Kindred are 2 junglers to pay attention to as well, as they'll both be impacted by the ADC item changes. It will be interesting to see what Kindred ends up rushing now, as Kraken had been core on her for a while, but with the item losing its crit, it may not be viable anymore. Lane Viego will be receiving a pretty big buff to his sustain for next patch, as Q mark healing from minions is going up from 10 to 50%. Viego mid has actually been seeing pretty solid results in previous patches despite his lower play rate. For the past 5 patches now, he's been right around the 50% win rate mark, so these buffs could actually make him a very solid mid lane pickup. A lot of this is going to depend on how the item changes land for Viego, but he should be stronger as a whole in mid lane for 14.10, and we'll be placing him in the A tier. With the crit on items being increased for this patch, Riot will be nerfing Yasuo and Yone's crit chance multiplier, going from 2.5 to 2. Excess crit to bonus AD conversion is going up, however, from 0.4 to 0.5. From testing on the PBE, it does look like both champs will be losing strength in 14.10 due to lethal tempo being removed and crit now gone on Kraken Slayer. Infinity Edge with Phantom Dancer has the potential to be the new core build for both champions, but we'll have to see once the patch hits live servers. For now, we'll be keeping both champs in the mid lane B tier, as we expect for them to be more on the underwhelming side to start 14.10. Mid lane won't be impacted by the item changes as much as other roles, since it's mainly just the Mage item changes that have the potential to impact a broader array of champions. For that reason, there won't be any major movements to the tier list in 14.10, as Brand and Vex will remain as the OP carries. Blackfire Torch is the one new item addition that could impact a bunch of mid lane champs, but since it's got the bonus damage to monsters tied to its passive, we definitely see the item having more potential on junglers than mid laners. Twisted Fate is one champ we'll be moving down the tier list for 14.10. Rapid Fire Cannon losing its AD will negatively impact Twisted Fate, as he doesn't really like the trade-off of getting more attack speed. Shurelia's was also overperforming super hard as a rush item on TF in recent patches, so with the item nerfed, it's another indirect blow to Twisted Fate. Tristana is one of the few mids who will be impacted by the ADC item changes, and we could see them being quite positive for her. Losing Kraken shouldn't even be that bad for Trist, as she can just rush Infinity Edge, and due to the attack speed steroid on her Q, have some pretty nasty DPS potential on that one item spike. IE with either Flicker Blades or Phantom Dancer seems like it should have some solid potential on Trist. Trist also doesn't really mind the removal of lethal tempo or nerfs to Halo Blades, as Press the Attack and Fleet are both perfectly viable keystones for her. Tristana should be in a pretty great spot for 14.10, so we're going to be moving her into the mid lane S tier. Direct champion changes are quite light for most roles in 14.10, but ADC is getting a massive one, with Corki receiving a mini rework focused towards turning him back into a bot lane carry. There are a plethora of base stat changes being issued, so instead instead of reading through all of them, we'll have them up on screen if you'd like to pause. The major one is to Corki's base AD, which is dropping from 61 to 55. So with this change, it means that Trinity Force loses a ton of power, and we likely see some sort of crit build make its way onto Corki. Corki's passive is being changed as well, with the package aspect removed from the game entirely. Instead of converting 80% of Corki's attacks into magic damage, his attacks will now deal 15% of the attack as additional true damage. Q is getting a bunch of changes, with the base AD going down, but the bonus AD scaling is heavily buffed. Missile speed, cooldown, and cost are all being adjusted as well. W has a few minor changes, with its tick rate going up. The spell will now have a minimum range of 300, and the cost is being increased at the later ranks. Riot has a ton of changes planned for Corki's E, with the big one being that the resist shred is going up, and it will only require 4 ticks to reach max stacks instead of 8 from before. Cooldown, cost, and damage type are all being adjusted on the spell as well. Corki's R is being changed, so the spell is going to hit a lot harder, but you won't have access to as many charges as before. The cooldown on Corki's R is going to scale off of crit, as basic attacks against champions will now refund 2, scaling to 4 seconds of cooldown based on how much crit you have. The base damage on Corki's R is up significantly at rank 2, however. The AD scaling is being changed from a total AD ratio to a bonus AD ratio, as it will be 70% bonus AD at all ranks. AP scaling on R is also being removed, so we definitely won't be seeing any hybrid variations of Corki. All in all, it looks like Crit Corki will be making a comeback for this patch. Manamune likely remains a core purchase, but going for crit items like Infinity Edge and even Yuntal Wild Arrows could be quite interesting on Corki, since he likes a lot of flat AD. Power-wise, Corki should definitely be a more viable bot lane pickup for 14.10, but as for where he'll land exactly, it's anyone's guess. Take this tier list placement with a grain of salt, as we'll be placing Corki in the ADC A tier, but we'll definitely follow up with a more accurate rating for the mid-patch tier list once we get time to see him on live servers. The ADC tier list is going to be all over the place throughout the next patch or two, as it's likely Riot ends up buffing and nerfing a ton of items or champs that end up too strong or too weak from the item adjustments. Our initial expectations going into the patch are as follows. With more flat AD being added onto Infinity Edge and Bloodthirster, Draven is a frontrunner to really run away with 14.10. Lethal Tempo being removed doesn't negatively affect Draven as much as many other ADCs, since he's perfectly fine going Conqueror or PTA in its place. Jhin is another ADC we're quite high on for this patch due to more AD being added to Infinity Edge, and the Collector, which should provide a really nice 2-item spike. Samira should be a big winner as well, since she already runs Conqueror, and both her core items being the Collector and Infinity Edge are buffed. Now, as for some of the bigger losers of the patch, Smolder and Ezreal are likely to have a tougher go at it. Ezreal losing Essence Reaver's Spellblade passive hurts, and even though he can transition to Trinity Force, it's not been his preferred item as of recent. Same thing with Smolder. Losing Spellblade on Essence Reaver really sucks for him, and it's tough to see a good alternative replacement. With Quick Blades now being rebranded to Flicker Blades and losing its AD in exchange for attack speed, Nilo will be hurting. Nilo wants her flat AD from items, so she won't be able to go Flicker Blades, and although Infinity Edge likely slots in now, it's not going to be as strong as the previous Quick Blades was for Nila. With the Infinity Edge rush back on the menu, watch out for Caitlyn and Tristana in specific. Both champs will have a ton of upfront burst potential with the IE rush, and especially for Trist, who has the attack speed steroid on her Q, she'll be hitting super hard during all-in plays on that one item spike. There's so much more that could emerge due to the item changes that we just simply can't cover all in this one video, but definitely be sure to check back for our mid-patch tier list update, as we'll have a more precise outlook of how the item changes have panned out. Support is the one role that has been more or less just left alone in 14.10. There were a few changes to some of the niche support items like Dawn Core and Echoes of Helia, and some adjustments to Zeke's Convergence, but overall nothing too game-breaking, especially compared to ADC. As a result, the tier list won't be changing for 14.10, as the OP tier will consist of Sona, Braum, and Melio. Being able to pilot both an Enchanter and a melee support will suit you very well for 14.10. We expect the ADC meta to be very diverse, with everyone testing new builds on their favorite champs, so there shouldn't be one ADC who just gets the majority of the play rate. If your team locks Draven, Samira, or Tristana, being able to play someone like Pyke, Blitz, or Braum, who can skirmish really well and snowball the early game, will work great. Vice versa, if you've got a Corki, Jinx, or Aphelios, who are more so looking to scale into their item spikes, locking in Melio, Sona, or Janna to protect them through the early game is a great plan. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top-tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit skillcapped.com and see the difference. So that's what we're looking at as we head into one of the biggest patches of the season. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.